Volvo has long since been giving us some of the safest cars on the road. And while they've tried to do performance variants with R-designed versions of popular models such as the XC90, they've never been true performers. But now, with the help of Polestar and the 2020 XC60 Polestar, we have electrification coming in to give us extra power along with a turbocharger and a supercharger, which should make for a very interesting package. And we're gonna check it out, but first make sure you like the video and subscribe to our channel. So now we're behind the wheel of the 2020 Volvo XC60 Polestar. And let's start with the most interesting thing about this car, that being its engine. Because under the hood we have a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, which is supercharged, turbocharged, and it has an electric motor. Now, this is a plug-in hybrid. Basically, while many plug-in hybrids are usually designed to be efficient, this one is supposed to be the sporty one. You'll recognize Polestar used to be the sort of sporty division of Volvo. Think of him like an AMG to a Mercedes, that sort of relationship. But Polestar in recent years has split off completely and is now its own separate brand, making exclusively electric vehicles. But some of that electric research and that magic has been brought into some of the standard Volvo cars, such as the XC60 that I'm driving today. So based on all those powertrain complexities, you're probably wondering, how much horsepower does it make? And the answer is 415 horsepower from the combination of both. Now, keep in mind, the added benefit here is that you can drive completely in electric mode. Now, you're not gonna get very far in electric mode, but it does allow you to eke out a little bit of that extra fuel economy and a little bit of extra torque performance when accelerating. And I'll demonstrate. So right now, I'm currently on the highway. We're doing about 66 miles an hour, and let's say I want to go onto the left lane and accelerate. So I'll put my foot down, and then the electric motor will give me a little bit of instant torque while the transmission and the regular engine catch up to give us the full strength. So I'll show you. Put my indicator, get a little bit of boost going with the electric motor, and as I put my foot down, the gas motor comes in and we're off. So it picks up speed quickly, but it's because of the aid of both. Now, the supercharged, turbocharged engine does have a little bit of lag to it, but then the electric engine serves to sort of eliminate that as much as possible. The downside here is that if you're using hybrid or eco mode, you're gonna drain those batteries. And then once the batteries are depleted, you're gonna only have your gas engine to rely on, which means the XC60 is going to drive like a standard XC60 without the sort of Polestar sprinkled on top. Now that's not too bad because you're still producing around 345-ish horsepower, which is more than enough to move it around, but it takes it a little further away from the sort of performance SUV benchmark, which seems to be closer to the 500 range, given this car's price and space in the segment. So attached to that gas engine is an 8-speed automatic transmission, which seems to be clearly tailored towards comfort, drivability in sort of city scenarios or that kind of thing. Not really towards performance, because it is a little slow to respond and it doesn't seem to be ready when you want to go wide open throttle or anything like that. Now, Volvo has added various engine modes. If I click the driving mode wheel here, you'll see there's constant all-wheel drive, pure, which is a sort of eco mode, hybrid, which is the one that I've been driving the most, which is it switches between the electric and the regular powertrain to kind of save you as much fuel as possible. And then you have my favorite mode, the Polestar engineered mode. This is basically when you get everything out of the XC60 Polestar. This is where the battery and the actual gas engine are tuned together towards being fast and nothing else. Now there's an added benefit here. If you're driving in Polestar engineered mode, I've noticed that your battery will begin to charge up because it's running the engine at all times. And basically means that if you are depleted from your battery range, you can drive in Polestar engineered mode and eventually get a little bit of range back. Now there is an off-road mode as well, but I doubt anybody will be using that because if you'll notice, on all 4 corners of this car, we have 22-inch wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0 tires. Now you might be wondering, Why are the wheels so big? Look right behind them, and painted in gold, you'll find a set of enormous brake calipers. They are absolutely huge. And even with the 22-inch wheels, they barely clear it. You'll see if you look up close that the clearance is very tight. Those brakes are enormous. Now, as you'd expect from massive brakes, braking performance is excellent. It's incredibly strong and it does not fade. This is a car that you can definitely feel that the brakes are way overcompensating for what the car can actually do. The best part of the brakes is that they're actually very easy to operate, even at lower speeds. You get into some cars that have enormous brake rotors and they're a little squeaky, a little hard, a little grabby at lower speeds, and it's kind of hard to modulate them, but this is very easy. Volvo has definitely fine-tuned this car to be incredibly drivable on a daily basis. Speaking of how the XC60 drives, let's talk about suspension, because I feel the Volvo traditional suspension setup is to be very soft, refined, very comfortable. That's kind of what you'd expect from like an XC90 or something like that. But this XC60 has definitely been firmed up. Now granted, it's not going to break your back, but it's also not super plush and comfortable. Now, I have driven other performance SUVs in this segment that you get in them and you basically break your back because the suspension is so freaking harsh. Now this one with 22-inch wheels is not getting any favors, but the suspension itself is not break your back hard. It's actually kind of comfortable, but you get the added benefit that the XC60 Polestar doesn't have as much body roll as a standard XC60. It's definitely been firmed up, but it's on that fine line between it's comfortable and it's no longer comfortable. But thankfully it's on the right side of that line, which means that you can drive the XC60 all day long without getting super tired. Which is important because if you consider that somebody is buying a performance SUV, that means this car has to be their everyday car and their fun car all in one. So if you've got to sit right on that balance in order to do that successfully, because you don't want to drive a car that you're uncomfortable in all the time or a car that's super boring when you're trying to have some fun. In terms of steering and feel, there isn't a whole lot. There is pretty much no information coming through the steering wheel. There's no vibrations and all. You definitely get a little bit of that sort of refinement that you get from like the XC90, where it kind of seals off the rest of the world. And I'm not sure that's something you would want in a performance SUV, but in a daily driver, then it kind of begins to make more sense. And that's kind of the impression that I've gotten from this car. It does have a bit of a, not sure if it's a confused personality or a split personality, but it's trying to be sort of a performance SUV, but it definitely leans more towards being a comfortable SUV more than anything else. So next, let's talk about the styling, because when this car first arrived at my doorstep, I looked at the wheels and I thought, wow, they're way too big. 22-inch wheels on a small crossover is a no-go recipe. This is something I would expect from like an XC90 or something like that. But after having lived with it a little bit and looking at it, it totally works. It absolutely works, and it works to sort of separate this XC60 Polestar from your standard XC60. The blacked out grille and blacked out accents throughout the exterior look fantastic. I absolutely love the way this looks because it looks sharp without being overstyled. It's still a very sort of minimalistic, simple Volvo design language without being incredibly over the top, but you do get that feeling that you're in a sporty SUV. So now there's little design touches that I also like a lot. The blacked out mirrors, the rear bumper has a blacked out gloss midsection, which helps to sort of break it up and make it look a little nicer. The front end has little gloss black inserts all over, and what you get is a SUV that does not look overstyled. It looks very classy. Even though it's trying to be sporty, it still manages to look very classy. There's not massive air intakes and vents everywhere that's sort of trying to be like, oh, I'm so strong, I'm such a fast, sporty SUV, but I'm really not. It's actually really nicely executed, and honestly, I think it's fantastic to look at. And that beauty carries on to the inside. As I mentioned in our earlier Volvo XC90 review, I love the way Volvo sets up their interiors, because even though there is a tablet here, which we'll get to in a second, it's not just stuck on here. You see these air vents on either side. They are the length of the tablet, and they make everything feel integrated. There are some car manufacturers that they just slap a tablet up here and they call it a day and then you're good to go. Volvo has definitely taken a little bit of extra time to make sure that everything is incorporated and it sort of keeps that very minimalist style that they're very known for. The added benefit of having a screen that's nicely integrated is that it's easy to use. There are some cars that have touchscreens that are kind of stuck on too high, and then they don't have a little controller down here, which means you have to touch it and it's kind of far and you have to take your eyes off the road to really operate it. Whereas this one being down low, it's much easier for reach and they don't have to put a controller here, keeping this design here very, very simple. Now, you look here, we only have the shifter, the start stop, and the engine select. That's about it. There's really nothing else to this sort of centerpiece of the dash, which kind of then alludes to this sort of minimalism. So one of the most surprising things about the XC60 were actually the seats, because they hold you in pretty well. Now, they're not bucket seats by any means, but they have a decent amount of bolstering in them, meaning that you can take corners at whatever speed you want, and it doesn't matter, they're gonna hold you in. Now, the one downside to that is that if you're any larger than I am, you might find them a little tight. I'm not the biggest person in the world, but I definitely do feel them kind of holding me in nicely. Next, you'll notice that I have this gold seatbelt, which I think is a fantastic touch because they tie in perfectly with the brake calipers that are down there and are shining through those wheels. And it sort of brings a little bit of that excitement that this is not your standard XC60 into the interior without it being overly shouty or overly clouded in Polestar badges. That's something else you'll notice about this interior. There are no Polestar badges anywhere, which is actually surprisingly nice because there's some cars that they'll kind of shout at you at what they are, whereas the Polestar definitely goes about it in a much more subtle, much more restrained kind of way. So what we're left with then is a plug-in hybrid SUV with 415 horsepower, a stylish minimalistic cabin, and excellent build quality throughout. But there's one big problem here, and I think that has to be the price. Because for $70,000+, it's a lot of money. And considering the performance that you're getting when you compare it to some of its competitors that are giving you a bit more power for around the same money, then if you look at the XC60 as just a performer, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So in order to understand this SUV, you have to look at it as an all-rounder because you're paying for the style, the cabin, the refinement, and everything as a whole then begins to make sense. So if you're looking for an all-out track star, this probably isn't it. But if you're looking for a well-rounded, decently quick SUV that'll basically suit all of your needs, then the Polestar starts to make sense. And let's not forget that incredibly interesting powertrain, supercharged, turbocharged, and electric, which gives you an even more unique experience than anything else on the market. So I want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.